The strangest thing about that night was not the smell of burning paper spreading through the living room, nor the firelight flickering across the red brick wall, as if the whole house were silently witnessing something irreversible. The strangest thing of all was how calm my father was. He stood there in that large suburban house outside Chicago, holding the college letters he had managed to get his hands on between two fingers. Looking at my name on the envelope, the way a man looks at a mistake that needs to be erased. Then he fed it to the fire. No shouting, no loss of control, just a chilling kind of composure, as if destroying his daughter's future were the reasonable thing to do to save the family. My name is Chloe Mercer. I was 18 that year, an age when a girl should have been allowed to dream about a college campus, a new city, a life of her own choosing. But in my house, dreams like that were always treated as selfish. My mother, Elaine Mercer, stood beside my father, holding the rest of the envelopes in her hands, silent in a way that felt cruel. My brother did not even bother to look up from his laptop, as if my life turning to ash was only a minor inconvenience while he built his own future. That night, my father said there was not enough room in the family for my dreams, because everything had to be kept for his son. He believed he had burned every door that might have carried me out of that house. But he did not know. The most important letter had never been on that table, because by then I had already learned not to leave my future where he could reach it. If this story touches something in you, stay with me until the end. And if you have ever known what it feels like to be diminished by the people who should have valued you most, leave me a comment and tell me where you are watching from. The truth is, the night those letters were thrown into the fire was not the first time I had seen my parents choose Ryan over me. It was only the first time they had done it so clearly, so beautifully, that there was no room left for illusion. Before that, everything in the Mercer house had always happened more quietly, more politely, and for that reason, it was easier to make outsiders believe we were just an ordinary family with a little harmless favoritism. But if you live long enough in a house like that, you learn there are forms of cruelty that do not need raised voices to do their damage. Ryan was 3 years older than I was. From the time he was little, he had been told a very beautiful story about himself. In that story, Ryan never truly failed. He had only not found the right environment yet, not met the right people yet, not reached the right moment yet. When he dropped out of his first school, my mother sighed and told her friends that the program there had not been good enough for Ryan. When he dropped out of a second one, my father shrugged and said, "He is not built to follow the beaten path. He has the mind of a trendsetter." They repeated it so often that even Ryan believed it was true. He began to walk through the house with the air of someone the world would discover sooner or later, and everyone around him had only one job: to keep his road as smooth as possible. My role, meanwhile, was much simpler. I was the easy one, the one who did not cause trouble, the one who understood. Those words sounded gentle, but in my house they always meant something else. They meant I was supposed to step back at the right moment, stay quiet at the right moment, be talented enough to be useful, but never bright enough to make anyone uncomfortable. I still remember the year I was 15, when I brought home a report card that was nearly perfect for the first time. I stood in the kitchen with my heart racing, waiting for my mother to look up and smile at me, even just a little. She glanced at the paper, nodded faintly, then immediately opened the drawer beside the sink and tucked it away. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "Just leave it there, honey. Ryan has not been feeling good about himself. I do not want him to feel pressured." I stood still for a few seconds, my backpack still hanging from one shoulder. "But I just wanted..." I did not even finish the sentence before she turned back to drying the plate in her hands. "I know. You are a good girl. You understand your brother, don't you?" Things like that happened so many times that eventually I stopped remembering what it felt like to be fully proud of myself. When my English teacher called the house to praise one of my essays and said she believed I could get into some very good schools, my father listened, and then asked exactly one question at dinner. "If you write that well, why don't you help Ryan fix his presentation slides? The mess he made of them is embarrassing." Ryan sat across from me, eating and cut in without even looking up. Exactly. Just write my opening lines for me. Investors like things that sound intelligent. No one asked how happy I had been that day when my teacher praised me. No one asked what I wanted. One time Ryan sank nearly all the money my parents gave him into a t-shirt business with flashy slogans. 3 months later, stacks of unsold boxes filled the garage, and the smell of printing ink and cardboard clung to the Christmas decorations stored there. My mother made him tea. My father sat beside him at the kitchen table, and his voice dropped into that low, patient tone men use when they want to sound wise. "It is all right," he said. "Anyone who does big things has to stumble once." Ryan lowered his head and acted devastated, while I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water, thinking about my weekend shifts at the diner, thinking about the tip money I had been saving for college application fees. That same night, when I gently reminded my mother that I wanted to keep part of my paycheck that month, she looked at me as if I had said something petty. "The family is carrying your brother right now," she said. "You are always fine. Ryan is the one who needs help." I smiled a little. The kind of smile you use when you know saying more will not change anything. "Okay," I said. And that was always what made them most comfortable with me. Not my intelligence, not my hard work, but my ability to swallow everything so the house could remain peaceful. In my family, Ryan was always called potential. I was called practical. It took me many years to understand that practical was not praise for a daughter who knew how to be responsible. It was only a prettier, more polite way of naming the child the family had quietly decided to sacrifice. Looking back now, I believe the moment I truly left the Mercer house was not when the back door closed behind me, and not when I stepped onto the dark road with a canvas bag over my shoulder. It began much earlier, in the days when I realized something was wrong with my mail. Thin envelopes carrying bad news always arrived right on time. But thicker envelopes, the ones with seals I had dreamed about in my head, kept disappearing in ways that did not feel accidental. At first, I blamed myself for hoping too much. Then one afternoon, I saw my father standing at the front door with a stack of unopened mail in his hands, flipping quickly through each piece before carrying it into the kitchen. He did not know I was standing behind the living room curtain. It was the way he handled my mail, as though it were his property, that placed one very quiet thought into my mind. If I did not protect what belonged to me, no one would. From that day on, I started watching for the mail truck when it came down our street. I memorized the sound of the engine, the color of the mail carrier's cap, even the way he always paused for a few seconds to sort the envelopes before getting out. I pretended to take out the trash. Pretended to stand at the end of the driveway talking on the phone. Pretended to search for something I had dropped in the yard. For 3 straight days, I stood there like a shadow that had learned patience. On the 4th day, I saw it in his hand, a thick, cream-colored envelope. The dark blue seal in the corner one, I recognized even from that distance. My heart pounded so hard that my ears rang. I stepped toward him before he could turn into the walkway leading to the house. He smiled and handed me the envelope as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world, and I thanked him in a voice so calm no one would have known my hand was shaking. That night, I did not open it right away. I carried it upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and sat on the floor beside my bed for a very long time before sliding my finger beneath the flap. When I saw the word congratulations and the phrase full scholarship, I did not cry. Strangely, I did not feel happy right away. The first thing I felt was a cold rush down my spine. Not because I was afraid, but because somewhere outside that house, someone had looked at what I had done and said, "You deserve this." That one sentence, printed on paper, was kinder than years of living under my own parents' roof. So when the other letters burned in the living room that night, what they destroyed was no longer everything. They only burned the part they could touch. The rest, the most important part, had already been resting beneath my feet for days. After everyone in the house had gone to bed, I sat at the edge of my mattress, untied my old sneakers, lifted the thin insole worn flat with time, and pulled the letter out. The light from my desk lamp fell across Columbia's seal, and made it gleam in my small room, and for the first time that night, I felt my breathing slow. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bag. Then I took the black canvas bag from the back corner of my closet and packed 3 changes of clothes, my old laptop, the cash I had hidden inside an empty tampon box, and the little notebook where I had written down every time my money had been taken, because Ryan needed it. Not because I thought I would ever use that notebook to confront anyone. I carried it because it was proof that I had not imagined any of it. Proof that parts of my life had been worn away a little at a time. Very politely, very reasonably, until outsiders might have mistaken it for love. When I came downstairs into the kitchen, the house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming and the digital clock on the microwave change to a new minute. I placed my key ring on the stone countertop. Then I tore off a sheet from the notepad beside the landline phone and set it there beside the keys. The paper was blank. Not one word. I stared at it for a few seconds and felt that the empty page said more than anything I had ever tried to explain in that house. I did not owe them an explanation for saving my own life. I pulled the back door open slowly so the hinges would not creak, then stepped out into the dark yard without looking back. Not because I was that strong, but because I knew that if I turned around even once, if I saw the dim kitchen window behind the curtains, if I saw the familiar roofline standing still in the night, I might remember I was only 18 and begin to feel afraid. I did not give myself that chance. I walked to the bus station with the canvas bag pulled tight against my shoulder, my old sneakers scraping over the pavement, the soles of my feet burning, though I could barely feel it. The wind was cold that night, but the cold inside me was sharper. The overnight bus to New York was longer than I had imagined. People got on and off at different stops. Some slept with their heads against the window. Some talked on the phone in tired voices. Some sat in silence as if they, too, were leaving a piece of their lives behind somewhere in the dark. I sat by the window with my bag in my lap, eyes open for almost the entire ride. Not because I was not sleepy, I just did not dare fall into a deep sleep in a place where one careless moment might cost me the only thing still holding me together. Sometimes the bus stopped at bright gas stations in the middle of the night, and I looked outside at strange signs, strange people, and realized the world was much larger than the Mercer house. That did not make me feel safer. It only made me understand that I was truly alone. When the bus reached Manhattan, dawn had not fully broken yet. The city appeared through the dirty window like something both beautiful and indifferent. Everything moved fast, hard, and with no time to care about a girl arriving with an old bag and a few $100s in her pocket. I stepped off at the terminal and was swallowed by the smell of stale coffee, car exhaust, damp tile, and the sound of shoes dragging across the floor. I stood still for a few seconds in the middle of all those people rushing past me, trying not to let anyone see that I had absolutely no idea where to go next. The first 2 weeks did not feel like living. They felt like a chain of small calculations stitched together by fear. How long the cheapest cup of diner coffee might buy me a seat. Whether one bagel split into 2 meals would be enough to keep my head from spinning. I sat in places that stayed open all night, my hand always wrapped around the strap of my bag, pretending to read papers or stare out the window until exhaustion finally made me collapse onto the table for a few minutes. Some nights I stood in public restrooms, bent over a sink, brushing my teeth as quickly as I could before lifting my head and seeing my pale face beneath fluorescent lights. I had never imagined freedom could look so tired. One evening near the bus terminal, I slid my hand into my coat pocket and did not feel my wallet. My throat tightened instantly. I spun around, looking everywhere, my heart pounding so hard my ears rang. In my mind, I did not picture the money or the cards. I pictured having to go back, having to call someone, having to admit I had not gotten far enough away. I crouched near the waiting area benches, digging through my bag, looking at the floor like a person who had lost direction completely. Then I heard a rough voice behind me. "You looking for this?" I turned around. A homeless man was holding my wallet in his hand. His coat was worn and frayed, his beard gray in patches, his eyes tired but sharp. I almost snatched it from him, then stopped myself. Thank you, I said, my voice low and quick. He looked at me for a few seconds, not smiling, only nodding slightly as if he understood something I had not said aloud. People running for their lives hold their bags differently, he said. I do not know why that sentence went straight into my chest the way it did. Maybe because for the first time, in a city full of strangers, someone looked at me and saw what was actually true. Not a girl on a trip, not an excited freshman, but a person running from a place that had been suffocating her for too long. I stood there clutching my wallet and could do nothing but nod. He turned away first, disappearing back into the dark corner near the steps, as if what had just happened were nothing important. Nearly 2 weeks later, when the dorms finally opened, I dragged my bag through Columbia's gates in clothes I had already worn too many times. Around me were expensive cars, parents carrying boxes, laughter, long embraces, and gentle instructions spoken with love. I walked through all of that with my scholarship letter tucked safely in my bag, my steps slow but steady, knowing very well that I had not arrived at a happy ending. I had only stepped into a place where, if I wanted to keep my life, I would have to keep fighting in a different way. My first weeks at Columbia passed in a rhythm that felt sharp and thin as thread. During the day I went to class, taking notes until my hand went numb, forcing my eyes to stay open long enough not to miss anything written on the board. At night I worked at the library until almost dawn, then ran to the coffee shop a few blocks from campus, in time for the first morning shift. Some days I sat in class feeling as though my mind were drifting somewhere else, my body so exhausted that if I closed my eyes for a few seconds, I might fall asleep right there at my desk. But strangely, inside all that exhaustion, there was also a quiet place in me. No one yanked open my door at midnight to make me brew tea for Ryan. No one asked where my paycheck had gone. No one told me my dreams were hurting someone else. I was tired, but I was allowed to be tired for the sake of my own life. That difference alone was enough to keep me going. I learned how to stretch $1 into a series of decisions, buying used textbooks instead of new ones, walking an extra 20 minutes to save subway fare, eating slowly so the feeling of fullness would last longer. Some days I opened my wallet, counted the bills again and again, then tucked it away, as if doing that might somehow make the amount inside grow. I kept telling myself that if I could just make it through the first semester, things would become easier. People always said college life eventually settled into a rhythm, that if you were hardworking enough, patient enough, smart enough, some door would open. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. Then one night after my library shift, I was sitting alone in a corner of the study lounge, checking my phone just to see the time. Out of old habit, I scrolled past a few relatives' social media accounts I still had not worked up the courage to unfollow. I suppose some part of me still wanted to know what the Mercer house looked like without me in it. And then I saw the photo. Ryan stood in the old Mercer living room, where warm yellow light fell over the cream-colored rug my mother used to forbid me from stepping on with shoes. He held a glass of red wine, smiling with that familiar self-satisfied expression. My father stood beside him with one hand on his shoulder, as if he were touching his own legacy. My mother tilted her head and smiled, the way she smiled, only when she believed other people were looking at our family with admiration. Beneath the picture, one of my aunts had written, "Big things coming for Ryan Mercer's next venture." So proud of this family. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened my wallet. Inside was $17 and some loose change. $17 for the 3 days before I got paid at the coffee shop. $17 while they once again opened wine to celebrate Ryan's newest dream in the very room where my letters had turned to ash. I did not feel pain right away. The first thing that came over me was a very lucid kind of coldness, like walking into a room with the air conditioning set too low after standing in summer heat. I placed my phone on the table and looked at my own reflection in the dark hallway window outside the library. For the first time, I understood something I had never fully named. Leaving home did not mean I was free. Not really. If one day I managed to build a decent life, they would come and call it reconciliation. If I found a respectable job, they would call and remind me the family needed help. If I ever earned more, They would use every beautiful word they had ever taught me: responsibility, gratitude, blood, duty, to open a door back into my life. They would not need fire to break me again. They would only need to step in, carrying the guilt they had trained into me since childhood, and take little by little the way they always had. I sat up straighter, both hands resting on the cold tabletop. In the library there was nothing but the steady hum of the ventilation and the sound of someone turning pages in the distance. I heard my own voice in my head, calm enough to surprise even me. Escaping is not enough. I could not become someone who merely survived. I had to become someone they could not reach. Not in some dramatic or bitter way. In an absolute way. A height where the hands that had always known how to take from me could no longer touch me. From that moment on, my goal was no longer simply to leave the Mercer house behind. My goal was to build a life with doors that not even Daniel Mercer could open at will. From the night I sat in that library and understood I would never truly be safe if I only managed to get by, I began looking at everything around me with different eyes. Not just grades, work shifts, or rent due at the end of the month. I began looking at patterns, systems, things repeated often enough that they were no longer accidents. During the day I still went to class, still carried coffee, still smiled at customers with that careful politeness service work teaches you. But underneath that tired surface, my mind was doing something else. I began gathering every fragment Ryan had left scattered over the years I had lived beside him, the way he changed direction halfway through everything, the times he spoke the loudest when he was doing the least, the money he poured into image instead of foundation, the expensive dinners that appeared right before every collapse. I pulled out my old notebook and compared every number, every date, every empty promise my parents had called potential. At first, I only wanted to prove to myself that I was not crazy. That there had been a real reason for the feeling of injustice pressing on my chest all those years. I built spreadsheets, marked the dates Ryan started a new idea, the dates he demanded money, the dates my father raised his voice and said the family had to trust the process. And then the dates everything fell apart. Slowly, the collapses that had once seemed random began to form a rhythm that could be measured. I taught myself to code in the scraps of time left in a day. Between shifts, after midnight in the library, or in the back corner of the coffee shop, after the crowd had thinned. Many nights my eyes burned so badly the text on the screen seemed to drift, but I kept sitting there, writing, fixing, continuing, as if stopping would turn me back into a girl who only knew how to endure. One early fall morning, the coffee shop near the financial district was busier than usual. Men in suits stepped in, carrying the smell of expensive cologne, ordering in rushed voices while talking in tones that were low and tense at the same time. I was wiping down the counter when I heard two men at a nearby table arguing. One of them set his cup down a little too hard. "We can still read the market," he said, "but we cannot read people." A founder starts panicking, spends out of ego, makes impulsive decisions, and the whole company starts dying before the reports can even show it. The other man shook his head. The funds are looking at lagging data. By the time they see the problem, the money is already almost gone. I went still for a few seconds, the towel still in my hand. Not because I had heard a new idea, but because for the first time, I heard someone describe in the language of money and risk the thing I had lived with for years in the language of family. Ego. Panic. Undisciplined spending. Performances meant to conceal rot underneath. I went back to my dorm that day and barely felt my own feet touching the ground. I opened my laptop, pulled every scattered file I had built over months into one folder, and began fitting them together the way someone assembles a body. Not only cash flow, not only burn rate, I added the variables. Business textbooks rarely teach people to take seriously. How quickly strategy shifted after praise, how much vanity a founder displayed before investors, how often weaknesses were hidden beneath vision, the tendency to upgrade a lifestyle right before performance declined. Ryan had spent years teaching me what failure looked like. He just never knew I had been learning. My first model was rough. The interface was ugly, the logic uneven, the code clumsy in the same way my life was clumsy then. But it worked. It began to point out fractures before the surface truly cracked. It read not only finances but illusion. And once I saw that, I could never pretend it did not exist. I started researching who in this city might understand the value of what I had. The name that kept appearing was Vivian Cross. People called her many things. Ruthless, cold, sharp as a scalpel. She ran a Manhattan fund specializing in technology acquisitions and risk evaluation, famous for being able to look at a company for 5 minutes and tell whether it would live or die. I read every interview, every public profile, every small story I could find about her. The only thing that was undeniably clear was this. Vivian Cross did not care about anyone's moving personal story. If I wanted her to stop and listen, I would have to give her a reason that made her mind curious. The opportunity came in the least glamorous way possible. The coffee shop where I worked took a catering contract for a networking event in Midtown, and Vivian's name was on the guest list. I traded shifts, picked up extra hours, put on my catering uniform, and went as if it were just another work night. But through the whole event, I barely heard who was ordering what. I was only waiting for the right moment. At the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin and the exit corridor for the speakers emptied out, I set down my tray, slipped through a side hallway, and waited near the glass doors where a black car had already pulled up. Vivian Cross stepped out with the kind of walk that was not hurried, and yet still made people move aside for her. She wore a dark suit, her hair perfectly arranged, her expression so cool it seemed to reflect nothing but calculation. Her assistant moved ahead the moment he saw me blocking the path, but I spoke before he could say a word. "Your world studies markets," I said, doing my best to keep my voice from shaking. "Mine studies delusion." Vivian slowed. Only for a beat, but long enough for me to know I had not been dismissed. She turned her head and looked at me from top to bottom, neither irritated nor kind, just evaluating me with a precision that felt almost surgical. "5 words more," she said, "then I leave." I drew in a breath. I built a model that flags failure patterns before the numbers confess. Something in her eyes shifted. Not softened, sharpened. She held out her hand to her assistant, took a business card from him, and wrote something on the back. 72 hours, she said. "I will send you historical data from failed startups. If your model shows me anything useful, you get 15 minutes. If it doesn't, do not ever interrupt me again." The next 3 days barely contained any difference between morning and night. I lived between the library and the coffee shop, carrying my laptop as if it were an oxygen tank. I rewrote every line of code with a force made of rage, desperation, and a thin, fragile belief that if I did this well enough, my life might actually change direction. Sometimes I would rest my head on the table for a few minutes, wake with the edge of my notebook imprinted on my cheek, and start again. Sometimes my computer would freeze at the exact moment I thought I had solved the most important problem, and I would bite down on my lip to keep from making a sound. But I did not stop. I had nothing to rely on except my mind, and for the first time in my life, I decided that was not something pitiful. It was a weapon. By the time I sent off the final file, my hands were almost numb. I was not waiting for a miracle. I only wanted an honest answer. The next morning, while I was getting ready for a shift, my phone vibrated. The message was brief, exactly like Vivian Cross. "Tomorrow, 7:15 in the morning. Don't be late." The next day I sat across from her in a small glass conference room overlooking Manhattan, my old laptop between us. Vivian studied my model the way a doctor reads scans, without a single wasted compliment. She questioned me hard, interrupted me the moment I drifted from the point, and cut through every unnecessary word. At one point she tapped her finger lightly on the table and said, "The interface is terrible. The data architecture is still immature. But this core..." She looked up at me then, and for the first time her eyes stayed on my face longer than a few seconds. This core was not built by someone who only reads textbooks. I did not know how to answer, so I just sat still. Vivian closed the laptop and pushed it back toward me. "Good," she said. "Now let us see if you can survive pressure." And that was the first time in my life that an adult looked at me and saw neither obligation, nor usefulness, nor a backup wallet for somebody else's dream. She looked at me and saw a mind. Not gently. Not comfortingly. but honestly enough to change the course of my life. What followed was not a miracle and not overnight success. It was months of testing, rebuilding, failed assumptions, hard corrections, and pressure so constant that by the time the real offer finally came, I had already been living two lives for longer than my body could comfortably endure. Vivian did not hand me a future. She forced me to prove, again and again, that I could build one strong enough to survive in the world she came from. After that, time no longer seemed to move in any normal way. It seemed to accelerate with sudden precision, like gears that had finally found the right fit. Under Vivian Cross's hand, what I had once called a model was pulled apart and rebuilt from the ground up. She never said, "Good job," or "Well done." She only looked at the screen, pointed to a line of data, and said, "This is weak." Or tapped the table and told me, "You are letting instinct outrun structure." Some days I left her office feeling sanded down to the bone, but I still came back even earlier the next morning, because for the first time, someone's severity was not meant to shrink me. It was meant to force me larger. At first, my role was small, conditional, and watched closely. Nothing about it was handed to me easily. I kept going to school, kept working for Vivian's fund, and worked with the technical team to turn my model into a real product that could stand inside the world of finance. We strengthened the security, refined the scoring system, built warning layers based on behavior patterns that no one had previously treated as serious data. I learned how to speak in a conference room without apologizing for being there. Learned how to cut away unnecessary explanation. Learned how to look at a polished presentation and ask the question everyone else was too afraid to ask. The internship became a full role. The full role became something deeper inside product strategy. And at some point, I stopped being the girl who had been given a chance. I became the person major funds started requesting directly. But everything has a price. And perhaps the most painful price was not the sleepless nights or the mornings I walked into class dizzy from lack of rest. It came on a rainy afternoon when Vivian set a term sheet down on my desk. I read the numbers that only a few years earlier I would never even have dared imagine. An acquisition deal, equity, long-term compensation, an advisory seat after the merger. Everything someone like me, someone who had come from the Mercer house, should have been taught to believe did not belong to her. I turned to the last page, and Vivian spoke in that same calm tone she used for everything. "There is one condition." I looked up at her. "You cannot keep doing both." I said nothing. Vivian tilted her head, her eyes so sharp and still that they left me nowhere to hide. "Columbia got you out of that house," she said. "But this will make sure no one ever pulls you back." She paused, then continued, slowly and clearly. "A scholarship got you out. Real power is what makes sure no one can ever pull you back again." I looked down at the contract again. Beyond the windows, Manhattan blurred beneath the rain, the buildings standing behind a sheet of cold water. I thought of the scholarship letter hidden beneath the insole of my shoe. Thought of the night I had held it against my chest on the bus leaving Chicago, as if it were my own heartbeat. That degree was not only school, it had been the first proof that I had value. Giving it up did not feel like leaving a program. It felt like closing with my own hand the first door that had ever opened for me. I used to think that if I graduated, I said quietly, still staring at the page, no one would ever be able to take that away from me. Vivian did not answer right away. She only leaned back in her chair. "Chloe, a degree is a door. I understand why you cling to it, but you do not need a door anymore. You are building a fortress." I laughed softly, though I was not sure whether the sound came from sadness or from finally hearing the truth I had been avoiding. I was no longer the girl who was only trying to escape. I was standing in front of an entirely different choice: cling to the symbol of survival, or step into the thing that could make me truly untouchable. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake, but something in my chest ached dully, as though I were saying goodbye to an older version of myself I still loved. "Good," Vivian said when I had signed, not smiling, though her voice sounded slightly lower than usual. "Now the real work begins." After that, everything accelerated so quickly that sometimes I had to stop for a few seconds just to understand that I was living my own life and not watching someone else's through glass. The product became something funds actively competed to access, then something folded into larger due diligence systems. My name began appearing in rooms where, only a few years before, I could not even afford a decent sandwich for lunch. There was money in my account, equity, tailored suits cut to fit my frame, an apartment overlooking part of the city I had once thought would swallow me whole. But the greatest change was not material. It was this. I no longer heard the word family as a command. I had the ability to say no without fearing I would be pushed off a cliff. I had the right to refuse. By the time I was 24, I was sitting in my glass office, surrounded by files and reports that crossed my desk every day. One afternoon, my assistant placed a new pitch deck in front of me from a startup seeking an urgent funding round. I opened it automatically, my eyes moving over the summary, the market analysis, the growth plan. Then I saw the CEO's name in the upper right corner of the first page. Ryan Mercer. I did not move right away. His name sat there on the clean white page with a kind of ease that felt almost insulting. Beneath it was the logo of a new company, a name designed to sound modern, bold, full of promise. I turned the next few pages more slowly. The glossy language, the inflated revenue forecasts, the familiar phrasing so recognizable it made my throat go cold. And then I understood exactly what was lying in front of me. Ryan had not only returned with another dream. This time he had come far enough for his file to land on the desk of the very person the Mercer family had always assumed would remain forever the daughter who knew how to sacrifice. I sat still for a long time after seeing Ryan's name on that first page, long enough for my computer screen to dim and light again. It was not because I was surprised he had failed yet again. With Ryan, failure had never been surprising. What held me motionless was the way that failure had made a long, winding circle to return to my desk, dressed in better clothes, using more expensive words, and still carrying the same familiar smell. The smell of illusion, funded by other people's money. I opened the financial section before finishing the product overview. That habit was something I had learned from Vivian. A pitch deck is the story people want to sell, she used to say. The financial appendix is the part they cannot completely control. And just as I expected, it took only a few minutes for the glossy surface of Ryan's file to begin cracking. The software he was promoting had almost nothing truly proprietary. User retention was embarrassingly low. Revenue was vague, presented in a way meant to make the I mistake fantasy for growth. But the money going out was very clear. Office rent far beyond any real need. An expensive branding agency, lavish client dinners, a long-term luxury car lease categorized as company image, along with a long list of networking expenses that any honest reader would immediately recognize as vanity paid for with borrowed money. I turned to the collateral appendix, and my hands went cold before my mind even caught up. Daniel Mercer. Elaine Mercer. Both signatures lay across the loan documents like two neat, precise cuts. They had refinanced the house, drained nearly the entire retirement fund, accepted a high-interest commercial loan simply to keep Ryan's startup breathing for a few more months. I read the property address again, even though I did not need to. I knew every window in that house, knew exactly where the afternoon light used to fall across the kitchen wall in summer. They had offered the very place where my letters burned as collateral for yet another one of Ryan's dreams. The office door opened softly. Vivian stepped in without knocking, as she always did. She looked at me once, then at the open file on my desk. Bad, she asked, worse than I thought. I pushed the papers toward her. It is not just a weak startup. They have staked the whole house on this hole. Vivian flipped through a few pages, reading quickly. Her face did not change much, but I knew that kind of silence from her. It was the silence of a mind calculating how far something was from collapse. We can decline by email, she said after a moment. Clean, efficient. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes still on my parents' signatures. An email. A cold, standard rejection sent from an address with a company logo at the bottom. Ryan would receive it, my father would read it, and then he would sit in the living room telling my mother that the market was difficult right now, that investors lacked vision, that Ryan was once again simply ahead of his time. He would tell that story in the same confident voice he had always used. The one that had taught me as a child that truth mattered less than the version told by the stronger person. No, I said. Vivian looked up. If this ends in an email, he still gets to keep the story that favors him. I closed the file. He will turn this into another misunderstanding, another injustice, another case of Ryan not meeting the right people. Vivian rested against the edge of my desk, folding her arms. And what do you want? I looked out through the glass. Manhattan in the afternoon was hard and cold, all sharp surfaces and reflected light. For one brief second, I saw the old kitchen again, the stone countertop, the blank page I had left behind. Then the feeling passed. I want him to see who holds the power to decide. The corner of Vivian's mouth shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, just the thinnest recognition. That, she said quietly, is not a business answer. No, I said. It is the answer I owe myself. She remained silent for a few more seconds, then pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. If we do this, we do it properly, she said. No drama for the sake of drama, no scene, no loss of control. I know, Vivian nodded. Good, then bring them in. From that moment on, everything moved with a kind of precision that was almost cold. Vivian's assistant sent a formal invitation to Ryan's company, informing them that their file had passed the initial screening and had been requested for a live review by one of the fund's silent partners. The wording was polished just enough to stir the thing people like Ryan are always starving for, the feeling of finally being seen by someone big enough to matter. The meeting was scheduled for a weekday morning at headquarters, in a high-floor conference room, in a reserved time slot. CEO and one senior company representative only. Ryan would absolutely bring my father. I knew it before the assistant even confirmed the attendees. Daniel Mercer. There was nothing in the world that made him feel more important than walking into a financial conference room and believing the fate of the family rested in his hands. The night before they came, I brought the file home to my apartment and did not open it again. I had read enough. I knew exactly where Ryan was standing, at the edge of a cliff, still speaking in the language of winners. I knew my father would wear a dark suit slightly out of date but neatly pressed, and walk with the posture of a man who still believed patriarchal authority had value everywhere. I could even imagine my mother at home following their messages, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, convincing herself this was only the final difficult stretch before everything became glorious. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The city had not fully awakened yet, but the building lobby already gleamed, carrying the smell of fresh coffee and polished wood. A scent of controlled power. I chose a cream-colored suit, sharply cut, but not showy, not to impress them. To remind myself that I no longer entered important rooms like someone asking permission to stay. I stepped into the conference room, just as the sun had risen high enough for light to angle across the glass walls, set the file in front of me, aligned my pen, and sat down at the head of the table. Vivian stopped by once before the meeting. She stood at the doorway and looked over the room, the preparation, the order. Still sure? She asked. I nodded. Then remember this, she said. By the time they walk in, the outcome is already decided. What matters is who understands it first. After she left, the room fell silent. There was only the low whisper of the ventilation and the city below, moving at a distance as if it had nothing to do with me. I placed both hands on the table and let my breathing slow. There was no loud anger inside me. No fear the way I once would have expected. Only something sharp and straight, like a blade honed long enough, finally resting in the right hand. At 9:57, the office line lit up. Reception said our guests had arrived. I looked toward the closed glass door at the far end of the room, the one that would open in a few seconds. Ryan and Daniel Mercer were only a few steps away now, carrying their presentation, their rehearsed lines, and their last illusion that New York might save them. They did not know that the door in front of them did not lead to money. It led to consequence. The door opened quietly, but in the stillness of the room the sound was strangely distinct. Ryan entered first, his presentation folder in hand, his shoulders lifted slightly, the way people carry them when they are trying to fit into a role too large for them. My father came in right behind him, back straight, chin lifted, wearing the familiar posture of a man who has always believed confidence alone would make a room submit. It took only a few seconds for their eyes to adjust to the light, and about the same amount of time for reality to reach them. Ryan recognized me first. His hand tightened around the folder until the edges of the papers bent. His mouth parted, but no sound came out at first. My father was slower by one beat. Then he saw me sitting at the head of the table in a pale suit, a file open in front of me, my pen aligned with the edge of the paper as if everything had been measured in advance. His face did not change in some dramatic way. It simply emptied out. Just for a moment, but long enough for me to know that for the first time in his life, he had walked into a room where the story no longer belonged to him. I did not stand. I did not offer my hand. I did not say anything like "what a surprise to see you here." I only gestured lightly toward the two chairs across from me. "Sit down," I said, my voice calmer than I had expected it to be. Ryan sat first, his breathing still uneven. My father pulled out his chair more slowly, trying to keep the movement from revealing how off balance he was. He glanced quickly around the room, as if still searching for some opening that would let him believe this was a misunderstanding. I opened the file. "I have reviewed your pitch deck," I said to Ryan, though my eyes stayed on the numbers in front of me. "The product has no clear technological advantage. User retention is so low, it is almost meaningless. Revenue has been presented in a way designed to create the illusion of growth, and most of the cash flow is not going into product development." I turned to the next page. "Branding costs are wildly disproportionate to the company's means. Vehicle expenses, entertaining, office space, so-called networking costs. All of it suggests this is not a startup building a future. It is a lifestyle being funded with borrowed money." Ryan swallowed. "Chloe, you do not understand everything. We are in a stage where—" "I understand perfectly," I cut in, still without raising my voice. "I know when the loan matures. I know the interest rate, and I know which house has been pledged as collateral." My father leaned forward sharply. "That is enough," he said, and in that instant I heard the same voice from years ago in the Mercer living room. The voice used to end every argument through authority instead of truth. "Whatever you think you are doing here, do not forget who you are. That is your brother. This is your family. If you have any power in this matter, then all the more reason to help, not sit there humiliating your own people." I looked up and met his eyes. There was something very strange about seeing the face that had once been able to frighten me and realizing it now belonged only to an aging man in a suit that no longer fit the times. "You are mistaken about one thing," I said. "You confused having access to my life with owning it." I paused, then spoke slowly and clearly. "You mistook access for ownership. Just because I came from you does not mean I belong to you." The room fell completely silent. Ryan looked at my father, then back at me, as if he had not yet decided whether to beg or be angry. I closed the file. "This investment is denied." My father looked ready to say something else, but by then I was already standing. Not quickly, not abruptly. Just enough for them to understand that this meeting had been over before they ever walked in. 2 days later, through a separate legal entity, and after a series of negotiated transfers, I acquired control of the debt attached to the Mercer house. By then, they were still trying to gather the last fragments of their dignity and construct a version of events that hurt less. I did not let the bank take it. I wanted that paper to pass through my hands, not because I needed one more victory, but because there are places in life you do not truly leave until one day you return and close the final door yourself. I flew back to Chicago on a gray afternoon. In the briefcase on the seat beside me, along with the debt file and the legal documents, was one old letter yellowed at the edges. I had found it in a scanned copy stored with my old admissions file. A letter from the high school teacher who had once written to my parents. She had written that I was the kind of student who, given one decent chance, would go farther than anyone else in the room. They had read that letter. They knew exactly who I was. And they still chose to burn those envelopes. That truth no longer hurt me in an explosive way. It had settled into something colder and deeper, a final layer that erased the last of my hesitation. When I drove onto the old road leading to the Mercer house, my mother, Elaine Mercer, was the first to step outside. She froze on the porch, one hand still on the frame of the door, staring at me as if a memory had come back in a form she could no longer understand. My father came out behind her, still trying to put on the appearance of control. Ryan stood a little behind him, pale-faced, his eyes holding both hope and fear. I opened my briefcase, pulled out the documents, and placed them in my father's hands. "I now hold the debt attached to this house," I said. "Under the terms that have already been executed, this property no longer belongs to this family in the way you think it does. You have 30 days to move out." My mother broke down almost immediately. My father flipped through the first pages, then looked up, his voice hoarse from trying to keep control. "We can negotiate." Ryan stepped forward. "You are taking this too far, Chloe. Just because of something old, you are really going to destroy the whole family?" I looked at all three of them, then at the house behind them, the house that had taught me that some roofs protect only certain people while others are burned as fuel. "I am not destroying this family," I said. "I was the only one in it who ever tried to become whole." My mother pressed a hand to her chest, tears streaming down her face, her voice broken, as she asked me what I intended to do with the house. I looked up at the roofline, at the living room windows, at the yard where one summer I had once stood, and told myself that if I could just survive this place, it would be enough. "I am not keeping it," I said, "and I am not selling it to another wealthy family." I pulled out the final preliminary agreement from the file. "I have already been working with a nonprofit. This property will be demolished and replaced with transitional housing and a scholarship fund for young women leaving families built on financial and emotional abuse." My mother stepped backward as if something had struck her in the chest. Ryan stood frozen. And my father finally stopped pretending this was a setback he could fix by speaking loudly enough. I put the documents away, closed my briefcase, and in that moment I understood something with complete clarity. Some legacies are not created by preserving the thing that wounded you. Sometimes a legacy begins when you take the very place that once burned your future and turn it into shelter for someone else's. Perhaps the strangest thing after all was not that I had come back, and not that I had found the strength to say the things I had never once been allowed to say before. The strangest thing was that when I drove away from that place, I did not feel victorious. I did not feel triumphant the way people like to imagine. I only felt light. A quiet, deep kind of lightness, as though some invisible wire had finally snapped loose from my chest. They thought they had burned the papers. In truth, the only thing they burned was the illusion that I would stand there forever, waiting to be loved, waiting to be chosen, waiting for someone to grant me permission to have a life. The rest of me had already left that house on the first night I learned how to be silent and save myself. And maybe many of us, in one way or another, have had to learn that lesson far too late. If this story touched you, if you have ever known what it is to walk away from a place that could no longer hold your heart, then I hope you will stay with me through one gentle tap on subscribe. I would also truly love to read your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and have you ever had to save yourself from the very people who were supposed to protect you?